Today we're going to learn a little bit about Socrates because there is a lot we can learn from Socrates. So let's jump right in. Socrates was a Greek born around 469 BC, so that's like 2,500 years ago. And this was really when Greece was starting to, having a representative type democracy, I guess. Socrates was kind of against that. But the deep exploration of ideas and thoughts, and Socrates was kind of the chief philosopher at the time and kind of really starting this movement towards, maybe you could call it wisdom. Let's look at a quote right here. So, there is no power on earth, whether angry mob or murderous government, that can force him to do wrong. And they're referring to Socrates right here. This comes from the Death of Plato. I will link it below if you want to read the book. And Socrates first shows up in history at a battle. And Greece is being defeated, and lots of Greek warriors are actually fleeing. Back in the day, when you fled from battle, oftentimes you were chased down and killed. The story is of Socrates here standing by some of his soldiers who had fallen and continuing to fight and actually saving their lives and exuding a high moral courage. So from an early age, because when you're a soldier, actually I don't think it was even that early. I don't know how old he was, but I think he was a soldier fairly late in his life. Either way, he exuded high moral courage that many people admired. But Socrates was also famous for looking inward. So there's this quote, "Know thyself." Socrates was really interested in exploring how one should act and how one should be in the world. And he was a lover of wisdom, we could say. And here's a good quote. "The only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing." So oftentimes, I guess this kind of highlights the humility of Socrates. So even though he was one of the greatest thinkers, for sure of his time and probably of all time, is that he was aware that he didn't know very much, right? And that is what made him wise, you could say. Sophomore actually means wise fool, because when you're young, a lot of times you sometimes think you know more than you do. And so as a sophomore, they call it the wise fool because you've learned enough to be dangerous, let's say, and you don't know enough to know that you don't know very much. So beware of that, right? That is where wisdom comes from, is in the knowledge that you don't know as much as you think you know. Francis Bacon, I think, highlighted the reason for this, of why we don't necessarily know what we know or what we think we know. And he says, "This human reason of ours is a confused multitude and mixture of ideas made up largely by accident, of much creduling, and of the opinions which we inherited long ago in our childhood." So you are kind of a genetic makeup who grew up in a certain environment, and so it's hard to exactly know what you're unaware of. And so that's where wisdom comes from, is in knowing that you probably don't know as much as you think you know. And then seeking that knowledge and looking for your own ignorance is where wisdom comes from. Socrates also was really interested in listening to his conscience. So this is Jiminy Cricket from Pinocchio. Most of us have seen this movie. And so Jiminy Cricket is the conscience for Pinocchio. He kind of sits on his shoulder, tells him when he's doing something wrong. And to Socrates, that's what your conscience was this voice in your head that told you when you were about to do something wrong. And Socrates spent a great deal of time trying to listen to his inner conscience and trying to follow that. And I think that's really what made Socrates such a impressive figure, was that regardless of the penalty, Socrates would listen to his conscience. So that kind of brings us back to this painting, The Death of Socrates. I have a link in the description that kind of breaks down the significance of this painting. But this is Socrates sitting on his deathbed, about to grab the poison there from his students. Socrates was charged with corrupting the youth and kind of defying the gods. And he went and faced trial. He was condemned to death. Now, everybody knew that he was going to be condemned to death, but he decided to face the trial instead of running away because Socrates was old. He was 70, and life, fleeing wasn't going to be that great. And his conscience told him, go and face this. So they condemned Socrates to death. He had to sit in a jail cell for, I think it was 30 days, maybe longer. And during that time, his followers were pleading him to break out because he probably could have broken out. but Socrates was willing to stick to his guns and force the Greek government to end his life, and it really cemented his place in history and just again exemplified his moral courage to go through with what he believed in. So there's this final quote that I kind of want you to reflect on for this video. I spend my whole time going about persuading you all, both young and old, to give your first and chiefest care to the perfection of your soul, and not till you have done that, to care for your bodies or your wealth, and telling you that virtue does not come from wealth, but that wealth and every good thing which you have comes from virtue. So let's explore that a little bit. Follow the other prompts, turn in your assignment, and I think that's good for today.